She cooked for him, she prayed for him, she built a home from scratch and loved him through every version of himself he offered her. And she did all of that while another woman was quietly, methodically taking it all apart. Now, before you assume you know where this is going, stop, because the other woman wasn't a side piece. She wasn't a colleague or an old flame. She was his mother. And I need you to understand, this is not your average mother in law story. This is not she made a passive aggressive comment at Christmas. This was a campaign, organized, patient, devastating. This is the story of Tola, and I promise you, by the time we get to the end, you will have feelings. Tola Akiyemi came to London at 24 with a nursing degree from Lagos State University, a small suitcase, and a stubborn belief that if you worked hard enough, life would meet you halfway. I love Tola already, that kind of optimism, the type that survives the journey from Lagos to London with one suitcase. That's not naivety, that's strength. She was placed at King's College Hospital in South London. Long shifts, short breaks, the kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. But Tola was built for it. She was the kind of woman who brought homemade food for the entire ward on a Tuesday. Not because anyone asked, but because that's just who she was. Which, by the way, tells you everything you need to know about her. She was a giver, and givers, unfortunately, tend to attract a very specific type of person. She met Henry Arins at a Nigerian community dinner in Lewisham, one of those events where the jollof rice is a personality, and everyone has an auntie who knows your auntie back home. Henry was tall, sharp suited, and charming in that way that makes you feel like you're the only person in a crowded room. He worked in investment banking in the city. He had plans, ambitions, a 5 year vision he could articulate with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Now, I'm not going to tell you Henry was a bad man because I don't think he was, not intentionally. But ambitious men who have never been told no, who have had someone feeding their ego since childhood, they have a particular kind of blind spot. And that blind spot will cost the people who love them everything. Tola's best friend Sede, sharp as a blade and twice as honest, pulled her aside that very first night and said, "He's fine, but watch his eyes when he talks about himself. They light up too much." Sede saw it from night one. Night one. I want you to keep that in mind. Tola laughed it off. She should have written it down, framed it, and put it on the wall. They dated for 2 years. Henry was attentive, generous, everything a woman could want on paper. But here is the question nobody thought to ask. Who was Henry when his mother wasn't watching? And who was he when she was? Henry's father, Mr. Emmanuel Arinsi, had passed away when Henry was just 16. A sudden heart attack, gone in a night. And I want to pause here because this detail matters more than it might seem. Losing a parent at 16 is devastating. And what it did to this particular family dynamic is the root of everything that follows. From that moment, it was just the two of them, Henry and his mother, Mrs. Juliet Arinze. Henry never really grieved his father. He grieved him through his ambition. Every promotion, every deal closed, every suit tailored. It was all for a man who wasn't there to see it. And Juliet understood that. She fed it. She nurtured it. She made herself the one constant in a world that had already proven it could take things away without warning. Which, look, I understand it. I do. She lost her husband. Her son was all she had. But here is where sympathy ends and accountability begins. Because what Juliet built over those years wasn't just a close mother son relationship, It was a dependency, and she built it on purpose. By the time Henry was an adult, the dynamic was completely set. Juliet didn't just love her son, she had built her entire identity around him. And anything that threatened to shift his attention, his time, his money, his future was a threat to her survival. Tola didn't know any of this when she agreed to marry him. She just knew that Henry called his mother every single evening without fail, and she thought that was beautiful. Bless her heart, said for the record, did not think it was beautiful. Every single evening, said, stirring her tea with the energy of a woman composing a strongly worded letter, not twice a week, not Sunday afternoons, every single evening. Tola, I'm just asking you to think about what that means. Said was right. But you know how it is when you're in love? The red flags look like confetti. Mrs. Juliet Arinze, or Aunty Juliet, as she preferred to be called, because she understood the power of making herself beloved before she made herself a problem, flew into London 3 weeks before the wedding, supposedly to help with preparations. She arrived with two large suitcases, a list of opinions nobody asked for, and an energy that Tola could only describe in hindsight as a woman arriving to supervise a demolition. But at the time, she seemed wonderful. She hugged Tola with both arms. She called her my daughter. She admired the flat, the color on the walls, the kitchen Tola had so carefully put together. And then, very quietly, she started rearranging it. And that right there, that quiet rearranging, is where it all began. The first year of marriage was the year Tola learned the difference between a mother in law and an occupying force. I said what I said. Auntie Juliet extended her short visit to 6 months. There was always a reason, a cancelled flight, a family matter back home that somehow required her presence in London. Henry never questioned it. Tola smiled through it. Her own mother called from Lagos and asked why she sounded tired all the time. I'm fine, mommy, Tola said, just settling in. She wasn't fine. She was disappearing. And the really painful part, she was doing it so gracefully that nobody could see it happening, not even her. The comments came in waves, always delivered gently, always with a smile, always deniable. Henry likes his stew with less pepper, dear. He's never mentioned it because he's too kind. Your career is wonderful, Tola, but these long shifts, you're never home. A man like Henry needs a present wife. I don't mean to interfere, but the curtains in the bedroom. Henry mentioned they disturb his sleep. He would never say so himself. Now, let me be very clear about something. None of these comments are innocent. Every single one is a tiny chisel, and Auntie Juliet was chiseling away at Tola's confidence, her identity, and her sense of belonging in her own home, one gentle comment at a time. This is what calculated looks like. It doesn't announce itself, it offers you tea first. Tola started doubting herself. Was she attentive enough, domestic enough, present enough? The doubts were small at first, like hairline cracks in a wall. She didn't yet understand that someone was tapping at them from the other side. Meanwhile, Auntie Juliet had also begun working on the extended community. At church gatherings, at Nigerian events, in WhatsApp groups Tola wasn't part of. Quiet words were being planted that Tola was very independent, that she put her career above her home, that she wasn't the warm, family centered woman Henry deserved. The WhatsApp groups she wasn't part of. Let that sink in. There were entire conversations happening about Tola's marriage in groups Tola couldn't see. And the person running those conversations was the woman calling her my daughter to her face. Henry, meanwhile, was absorbing all of it. Not maliciously, not at first. He was a man whose ambition had always been validated by his mother's voice. She told him he was exceptional. and he believed it. She told him he deserved the best, and he believed that too. So when she began slowly to suggest that Tola wasn't quite the best, the seed fell on prepared ground. And this is what I want you to understand about Henry. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who had never been taught to think for himself where his mother was concerned. And that made him, perhaps without even knowing it, her instrument. Sade watched all of this from close range. She pulled Tola aside at a birthday dinner 6 months into the marriage and said, "That woman is running a campaign. I need you to see it before it's too late." Tola went home and cried, not because Sade was wrong, because she knew with the quiet certainty of a woman who has been trying not to know something for a very long time that she was right. In the second year of their marriage, Tola fell pregnant. It was unexpected, but they were happy, genuinely, tearfully happy. Henry held her in the kitchen and said, "This is it, Tola. This is everything." She believed him completely in that moment, and I believe he meant it. In that moment, I think Henry genuinely meant it. She miscarried at 11 weeks. I'm going to give you a moment with that because a miscarriage is not a plot point. It is a loss, a real, private, devastating loss. And what happened next tells you everything about the people in Tola's life. Tola took 2 weeks off work. She barely spoke. Henry was present for about 4 days. And then he retreated back to the office, back to his routines. Back, she later found out, to long phone calls with his mother. Aunty Juliet visited. She sat across from Tola in the living room. This woman who had been dismantling her life for 2 years and delivered the words that Tola would hear in her sleep for years afterwards. Sometimes God is telling us something, my dear. Sometimes a closed door is a redirect. I want you to imagine sitting across from someone at the lowest moment of your life, having just lost a pregnancy, and hearing those words come out of their mouth with a sympathetic smile. That is not comfort. That is cruelty dressed in a church outfit. Tola said nothing. She stared at the woman across from her and understood, with total clarity, that this was not a mother in law. This was an adversary. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Things moved faster after that. Henry became distant, then critical. Tola's independence was suddenly a problem. Her ambition was threatening. Her long shifts were described as a choice, not a necessity. A woman called Bimpe began appearing at the edges of their social life. A family friend, Aunty Juliet said, always warm towards Henry, always introduced and positioned by Juliet. Sadie clocked Bimpe at the first event. She pulled out her phone, looked Tola dead in the eye, and said, "That's the replacement. They've already chosen her." And you know what's wild? She was absolutely correct. The marriage ended on a Thursday evening, not with shouting, not with drama, with a conversation so flat and so final it felt like being handed a diagnosis in a very calm voice. Henry said he needed space, that they wanted different things, that perhaps they'd moved too quickly. He didn't mention his mother once. Of course he didn't. Tola packed a bag, not a suitcase, just a bag, and went to Said's flat in Brixton. She sat on the sofa and didn't speak for 3 hours. Then she said, "I'm not going to fall apart. I refuse." And that, right there, is the moment I knew Tola was going to be okay. Because there is a particular kind of strength in a woman who is breaking and still refuses to shatter. Recovery is not a straight line. Tola would tell you that herself. There were bad weeks, nights when the grief, not just of the marriage, but of the miscarriage, of the years spent doubting herself, of the community whispers she'd had to unpick one by one, felt like it would swallow her whole. And can I just say, the community whispers are a particular kind of injury. Because now, she wasn't just healing from a broken marriage, she was also fighting a narrative that Auntie Juliet had been building for years. That is a lot to carry. But Tola Akinyemi had come to London with a stubborn belief that life could meet you halfway. She still had that belief. She just knew now to be more selective about who she let stand next to her while she waited. She went back to work. She enrolled in a senior nursing program. She found a therapist, a warm, direct woman who had a talent for cutting through the noise and finding the truth underneath. She found a church that felt like community rather than surveillance. Because, yes, for some of our people, church can go either way. Tola found one of the good ones, and she and Sade went on a girls' trip to Lisbon that Tola described as the beginning of coming back to herself. I choose to believe there was good food, good wine, and absolutely zero discussion of Henry. Her own family back in Lagos had complicated feelings about the divorce. Her mother cried. Her father said very little, which for him meant a great deal. There was an auntie, there is always an auntie, who suggested, with the confidence of the completely uninformed, that Paula should have managed it better. Managed it better. As if Paula hadn't spent 2 years managing everything while someone quietly burned it down around her. Some people's advice, I tell you. Tola called her father privately and said, Daddy, I need you to trust that I made the right decision for my life. Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I trust you, my daughter. I always have. That phone call. I can't even tell you. After all that, after everything she'd been through, that was the moment. Her father's voice saying, I trust you. Sometimes that's all we need to hear. 2 years after the divorce, Tola was promoted to ward sister. She bought a small flat in Woolwich, hers alone, decorated exactly as she pleased, with curtains that nobody would ever have an opinion about. She was 31 years old and for the first time in years, entirely herself. Meanwhile, Henry had married Bimpe. Auntie Juliet wore a gold gele to the wedding that had its own Instagram moment. She looked triumphant, and I imagine she felt it too. She had won. She had played the long game. She had broken up one marriage, installed her preferred candidate, and life was exactly as she wanted it. But here is what Auntie Juliet did not understand about winning. 14 months after that wedding, Tola received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. It was Bimpe. Now, when I tell you I did not see this coming, the first time I heard the story, I mean it. Because Bimpe was not calling to gloat. She was not calling to cause trouble. She was calling because she was sitting in her car outside a Tesco in Barking, crying, and she didn't know who else to phone. She'd heard through mutual friends that Tola was a fair person, that she had survived what Bimpe was only now beginning to understand she was living through. Auntie Juliet had moved in, uninvited, indefinitely, with the full support of Henry, who saw absolutely nothing unusual about it because to him it never had been. The woman she chose moved in on. Let that marinate. The kitchen had been rearranged within a week. Bimpe's cooking was too bland, then too spicy, then too complicated, then too simple. The comments were always delivered gently, always deniable. Sound familiar? Because it should. It is the exact same playbook, word for word. Auntie Juliet wasn't adapting her strategy for a new target. She didn't need to. It had worked perfectly before. Henry's late night had begun. Aunty Juliet had introduced a new family friend at a gathering the previous month, a younger woman, recently single, from a family Juliet described as very well connected. And Bimpe had found messages. "She's doing to me what she did to you," Bimpe said on the phone. "Quiet, devastated, isn't she?" And here is where I want you to pay attention to Tola's response, because this is the moment that defines her character. Tola sat with that question for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, she is. And I'm sorry." She said, "I'm sorry." To the woman who married her ex-husband. To the woman who, in another version of this story, could have been her enemy. Instead, Tola chose grace. Because Tola understood something that took me a while to understand too. Bimpe wasn't the problem. Bimpe was just the next one in line. They met for coffee in Greenwich the following Saturday. Two women at a corner table with the same bruise in different places on the same old wound. Tola didn't perform wisdom. She just told the truth. She told Bimpe what it had taken her far too long to understand, that Aunty Juliet wasn't cruel because she was a bad person. She was cruel because she was a frightened one, a woman who had poured everything into a son she couldn't bear to share, who had never built an identity that existed outside of him. And that kind of fear doesn't stop once it wins. It can't. It has nowhere to put itself except forward. You cannot outlove someone into choosing you over their own dysfunction, Tola said. "I tried. It cost me 3 years of my life. You have to choose yourself." 3 years of her life. And she sat across from a stranger and handed her the lesson for free so that she wouldn't have to pay the same price. That is not just grace. That is generosity of the highest order. Bimpe filed for divorce 7 months later. Henry, for the first time in his adult life, stood in a wreckage that even his mother hadn't predicted. 2 marriages, 2 women who had tried to love him well and left. He called Tola, not to reconcile, not to ask for another chance, but to say the words he should have said years earlier. "I'm sorry, Tola. I see it now. I'm so sorry." And I believe him. I believe he finally saw it. But I also want you to notice, it took losing everything for him to look. It took 2 women walking away before he could see what had been in front of him the whole time. That is the cost of never learning to stand on your own. Tola was gracious. She was brief. She wished him well and meant every word of it. Then she put the phone down, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat in the beautiful, hard-won silence of a life she had built entirely on her own terms. And honestly, good for her. Good for her. And Aunty Juliet, you want to know about Aunty Juliet? Of course you do. She returned to Lagos. The son she had sacrificed 2 marriages to keep close kept his distance now, because even the most devoted sons eventually grow tired of standing in the rubble of everything their devotion destroyed. She calls, he answers, but not every evening. Not every evening. For a woman who built her entire life around those calls, that is its own kind of consequence. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet. And sometimes the quiet ones hurt the most. The lesson of the Tatafo Express today is this: some people don't destroy your life out of malice. They do it out of fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being replaced. fear of a love they cannot contain or control. And that fear will reach into every corner of your world and hollow it out, including the very thing it was trying to protect. Auntie Juliet didn't just lose two daughters in law, she lost her son, not physically, but in the way that matters. She pushed so hard to keep him that she pushed in a way. The thing she feared most became the thing she caused. Tola didn't get revenge. She got free. She got herself back. And she gave another woman the map to do the same. Sometimes, the most powerful response to someone who tried to make you small is to simply become everything they told you that you weren't. Now, I need you to drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had an Auntie Juliet in your life? Because based on the stories I've heard, I suspect some of you know this particular flavor of pain a little too well. The comments are open. This is a safe space. Let's talk. If this episode sat with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Hop on the Tatafo Express. We drop new stories every week, and the tea is always hot. The lessons are always real. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
Where are you viewing from? If this story held your attention, please like and subscribe for more stories like this.